and as well we have Conor Axiotes, who is the Director of Communications at the Adam Smith Institute, who thinks Rishi Sunak is wrong. Conor's in the studio. Real pleasure to see you here. Hello.
Hey Peter, how are you? How was your 3 days off?
Oh, it was lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Conor, I'll maybe start with you and then go to James. Are you an idiot?
I'm not, and look, I'm not going to comment on what the Prime Minister said, but what he does do is get to the crux of the issue, which is inflation is rampant, people are feeling poorer as a result of that, and I and the Adam Smith Institute, as you'll know, are usually fiends for tax cuts. You know, we love tax cuts. That's under the presumption that we have an economy which isn't rampant with inflation. And at the moment, I think if you were to pursue the kind of tax cuts that we would usually be a fan of, you might stoke inflation. And what that means is the poorest in our society, the people who are really struggling, who can't pay for their essentials, gas, heating, food bills, they're the ones who are going to really struggle over this. But yeah, I think as a general point, taxation's at a 70-year high. This is not a position we want to be in, but this is a position that has come about historically.
So are taxes too high at the moment, Conor?
Taxes are far too high.
And is now the right time to reduce them or not?
No, I think where Rishi does have the right idea is that you need to wait for inflation to come down. And then from there you can start cutting taxes. Because right now, what will happen is you have an economy which is overheating, and you're just going to stoke that overheating, and people are actually going to get worse off as a result. And then what happens is people say, "Oh, look, you've done tax cuts, and no one feels any better off, and we haven't actually solved inflation, which is making people feel relatively poorer." Okay. Yeah, you might not have been expecting that from
I wasn't entirely expecting it, but it's an interesting one. It's a nuanced argument, certainly. Let's talk to James Perry as well. Let's bring him in. He's a co-founder of Cook and member of Patriotic Millionaires UK. James, you're very welcome to TalkTV this morning. How are you doing?
Thanks, Peter. Very good to be here.
James, what is Patriotic Millionaires, and what makes you a patriotic millionaire?
So we're a group of wealth holders who are making the point that the tax system is imbalanced because it puts too much burden on working people and work and doesn't tap this vast pool of wealth which has accrued over the last few years.
Okay, so how much money have you given yourself that you weren't originally asked to give?
Well, so tax isn't voluntary. So I would distinguish between tax and philanthropy. The point about tax is it's a systemic intervention to fund hospitals, schools, the things that the demos, the democracy decides that it wants provided for it. So philanthropy is not a solution to this. We need the tax system to look at all of the different sources of revenue and tax them fairly for everybody.
And what does that actually mean in terms of sources of revenue? Because there are certain things, of course, we can get tax cuts and tax breaks or tax loopholes as well. Tax avoidance isn't illegal. I have an ISA, for example. That is legal tax avoidance. That is paying less tax than I could otherwise have paid. But for someone in your position, which is a fortunate, wealthy position, what should you do, or what should you be asked to do you think? Just go into a bit more detail for us, James, in terms of what you think should happen for people who are very well off.
Okay, well, starting at the beginning, I think the first point is that tax is a contribution to a functioning society. You know, we all want to be in it together. We want a society that's working, and we can all see the disintegration of public services right now. And we have a taxation system which looks to income. So it looks to working people to fund those public services. And what it ignores is the fact that over the last several years, decades, new wealth, when it's created, has accrued pretty much to the wealthy. So 2/3 of new wealth created in the last 2 years has gone to the top 1%. So I think what people don't realize is that when you look at the kind of wealth distribution over the sort of from the poorest 1% to the richest 1%, when you get to the top 1%, you actually get down to the top 0.1%, and you see this new wealth creation drifts like snow into the hands of these extremely wealthy people, and then isn't touched by the tax system. And because the tax system is focused on the 99% who are really squeezed and undergoing this cost of living crisis, that's why the state can't afford to provide the services it needs, because it's just not touching this extreme wealth, which is a modern phenomenon.
It's interesting when you mentioned, Conor, I want to come back to you in a second, but just sticking with James for a second, it's interesting you mentioned this extreme wealth. I mean, surely the wealthy, maybe this is too cynical, surely very wealthy people will always find a way to avoid tax or move their wealth offshore or move to different countries where the taxation system is less onerous to people who are in, as you say, the top 0.1% of society. I mean, surely those people can always find ways, can employ people, can spend money speculating to accumulate in terms of making sure that that money is not taken away from them and given to the state, given that they can probably afford to live in any state, James.
Well, 2 points on that. The first one is that the tax system actually incentivizes wealthy people not to pay tax. You know, it offers a non-dom status, for example, where people can offshore their assets and not pay tax on them. So the tax system, for example, has a lower marginal taxation rate for income that comes from capital, from saving capital, than it does from work. So it already favors the wealthy in terms of its structural design. So that's the first point. And the second point is with respect to avoidance. You know, your assets have your name on them. You know, they are traceable. So this idea that people can ferret away their assets into under the sofa and the taxman can't find them is really not true.
But it's not necessarily about the taxman not finding them. It's about saying, well, I'm going to register my company in Switzerland, for example, where tax is lower, or I'm going to move to a different country or I'm going to base myself for tax purposes in a different country, surely.
Yeah, look, I think that there are people out there who are of that mindset, but I don't think they're in the majority. I think you'll find most people of wealth are rooted in community. Their children are being educated in British schools. They love Britain. They're here because they want to be here. And this idea that they can just up sticks and move to the Cayman Islands when the revenue service wants to take not an unreasonable amount of money off them. You know, they're going to still be left with substantial wealth. No one's talking about confiscation. We're talking about, for example, our group is talking about taxing 1% of wealth over £10 million. You know, these people are still going to be okay. But but even 1% of wealth over £10 million results in a massive tax take because these drifts of wealth that have accrued over the last years are just so massive.
Let's bring in Conor Axiodes again from the Adam Smith Institute. I note that just before I do, Gary Hawkins has been in touch on Twitter with a great question where he says, so people who want to lower taxes are idiots. What about people making videos in a car with no seatbelt on? That was an interesting comment from Gary. I think that's going to win tweet of the morning. We will see. Conor, what do you make of what James has said there in terms of his thoughts on that?
So I empathise with James, and I also empathise with patriotic millionaires, because you guys seem to understand that there's a problem in the UK when it comes to public services and the way our tax system is. So from that point of view, I want to say we have like a shared concern that things aren't working as well as they could do. But secondly, what I will say is the tax burden is the highest it's been in 70 years. So what that means is, you know, correlation doesn't always equal causation, but we're bringing in the most amount of tax we've brought in for the last 70 years, and public services aren't increasing as well. You know, they're not performing as we assume.
Well, are people getting value for money is a whole other debate, really. When you think about it, when you look at your pay packet when you get it at the end of the month, and you see how much tax has been taken, then you can't get a GP's appointment, for example, Conor.
Exactly. So I'm very happy that James and others are wanting to do are wanting to try and make the UK a better place, but I'm not sure asking people to pay more tax is the way to do it. Look, the government raised £900 billion last year. Like, it's nearly spending £1 trillion, which is, you know, nearly half of the size of our economy, and we still have the public services that we have. And also, I don't want to disincentivize great entrepreneurs like James, who has his business, Cook, which has brought a lot of joy to people. You know, there's probably a few of his products in my freezer at the minute, and I think the last thing we want to do is disincentivize entrepreneurialism. And because already I've got friends who want to go to New York, want to go to Paris and do the stuff that they want to do, because not only do we have a huge housing crisis in the UK, but also, you know, tax to the nines. So yeah, I think he's got the right. Idea with what the problem in the country is. I'm just not sure more tax is what's going to fix those things.
Okay, well, thanks both gentlemen very much. Maybe I think we do have time, actually, James, if we just bring you in, James Perry, just for a final word there, just to respond to what Conor says. James, over to you.
Well, yeah, just firstly, Conor, great to meet you as a customer, and thank you very much. What